What makes a place feel impossible? Not dangerous, not invented, impossible in the quieter sense, as if the world briefly forgot its own rules and allowed another reality to show through. Most of us move through life believing the planet is familiar. We know the grammar of mountains, the color of rivers, the shape of forests, the ordinary behavior of fire and stone. We trust the horizon to remain sensible. And then, somewhere beyond the edges of habit, the earth reveals a shoreline that looks painted, a desert that burns without rest, a river that seems to carry light instead of water. In those moments, certainty loosens its grip. This journey begins there, in that small human pause between seeing and understanding, not with myths or digital illusions, but with real landscapes shaped by pressure, heat, time, accident, and patience on a scale almost too large for the mind to hold. Some were formed over millions of years by rain, salt, and tectonic force. Others emerged because a plan failed, a calculation missed its mark, or nature answered human ambition with something stranger than intention. And yet what draws us to these places is not only their beauty, it is the feeling they awaken. Awe, certainly, but also humility. They remind us that the earth is not a finished map. It is still active, still improvising, still capable of producing scenes that seem to belong to dreams more than geography. So before we name the first landscape, hold on to that feeling. The sense that reality may be wider than routine allows, because the places ahead do not ask us to suspend disbelief. They ask for something more difficult and more human. They ask us to believe that the world, even now, remains far more mysterious than we are comfortable admitting. What if the first crack in our certainty appears not on land, but in the sea? Far above the southwestern edge of Mauritius, where the Indian Ocean shifts from turquoise to indigo, there is a view that unsettles even before it is understood. From the air, the water seems to open. A vast, shadowed shape appears to plunge downward, as though the ocean has found a hidden drain and is pouring itself into the depths. The illusion is so precise that the eye resists correction. It does not look like a trick of light. It looks like absence, like the sea has been torn, and yet the truth is gentler, if no less astonishing. Mauritius rests on a relatively shallow underwater shelf, a bright platform of sand and coral suspended above a dramatic drop. At the shelf's edge, currents sweep fine sediment over the boundary and into darker water below. Seen from above, those streaming plumes create the image of a submerged cataract, a waterfall beneath the waves. Nothing is collapsing. Nothing is being swallowed. The ocean is simply drawing with sand. There is something quietly profound in that explanation. We tend to think of illusion as deception, as though the world is somehow misleading us. But landscapes like this suggest something else. Perhaps illusion is only the name we give to patterns arriving faster than our understanding. The eye sees motion, contrast, depth. The mind reaches for the nearest story, a fall, a hole, a vanishing point, and maybe that is the deeper wonder. Not that nature fools us, but that it can still produce forms so strange, our first language for them is disbelief. From a helicopter window, with sunlight striking the water and the dark blue opening beneath, you can almost feel the brain hesitate. For one suspended second, the planet seems less like a home than a question. And that question follows us forward. If the sea can appear to break its own laws, what else on earth has been waiting for us to look more carefully? How can a shoreline change the emotional temperature of a continent? In northeastern China, where wetlands stretch toward the horizon and autumn arrives with a painter's patience, there is a coast that does not resemble any coast most people carry in memory. No pale sand, no familiar band of beige between land and sea. Instead, the earth ignites into red. Not a muted rust, not a passing blush, but a deep and saturated crimson that spreads across the tidal flats like a weather system made of color. At first glance, it feels theatrical, almost designed. But the red beach of Panjin is not the work of minerals or some hidden stain in the soil. Its color rises from life itself. A salt-tolerant plant, rooted in alkaline ground where few others can thrive, turns brilliant as the seasons shift. By autumn, whole expanses of marsh become a living field of scarlet, so wide and vivid that distance loses its usual logic. The landscape stops behaving like landscape. It begins to resemble memory, dream, or the imagined surface of another planet. And yet this strangeness is not empty spectacle. It is habitat. Cranes pass through, birds settle. Small lives depend on this place with no concern for whether human beings find it believable. That may be part of what makes it so moving. The scene appears extraordinary to us, but to everything adapted to it, this is simply home. There is a lesson hidden in that contrast. We often define the natural world by what seems normal to our own limited experience, as though beauty must arrive in familiar colors to be authentic. But nature has never agreed to those terms. It invents in abundance. It repeats itself only when it chooses. Sometimes it offers a meadow, and sometimes a red horizon that seems to glow from within. Standing at the edge of such a place, the question is no longer whether it looks real. The question is why we ever imagined reality had to be modest. And once that idea begins to fade, the world opens further. Not into fantasy, but into a wider form of truth, one in which wonder is not the exception. It is the pattern we keep forgetting to expect. What do one do with a mystery that grows in plain sight? In a quiet corner of northwestern Poland, a stand of pine trees rises from the earth as trees always do, with roots anchored in darkness and crowns reaching for light. But here, something changes just above the ground. Each trunk bends sharply northward, arcs like a drawn bow, then turns back up toward the sky. Surrounded by ordinary forest, these trees seem to have passed through a single invisible gesture, as though the land itself once pressed a hand against them and then withdrew. The crooked forest is not vast. It does not overwhelm through scale. Its power lies in repetition. Tree after tree, the same elegant distortion, the same curve, the same refusal to conform to expectation. It feels less like a natural accident than a sentence written in a language no one still speaks. There are theories, of course. Perhaps human hands shaped the saplings decades ago for some practical use now lost to memory. Curved timber was once valuable for boats, furniture, structures requiring strength and bend. Or perhaps weather did the work. Heavy snow, unusual pressure, a season of damage from which the young trees recovered in the only way they could. But no explanation closes neatly round the facts. Records are absent, witnesses are gone. The trees remain, carrying the evidence in their bodies without offering interpretation. That is what makes the place linger in the mind. We live in an age that prizes answers, searchable and immediate. Yet here is a small grove that withholds certainty. Not dramatically, not cruelly, simply completely. And maybe that is why it feels so intimate. The forest becomes a mirror for human memory itself. We all carry shapes formed by forces we cannot fully reconstruct. A pressure here, an injury there. A long recovery mistaken for design. Seen from a distance, the curve looks deliberate. Up close, it may simply be survival. So the question the crooked forest leaves behind is not only what happened here, it is whether understanding always requires resolution, or whether some truths are best honored by standing among them quietly, noticing the bend and admitting we do not know. What if the Earth's most vivid colors are not painted on its surface, but alive within it? In Yellowstone, where steam drifts across the morning air and the ground murmurs with hidden heat, there is a pool so radiant it seems imagined before it seems real. From above, Grand Prismatic Spring opens like an enormous iris, a center of deep blue, then widening rings of green, gold, orange, and red, as though the planet itself were holding a flame beneath glass. It is one of those sights that photographs struggle to defend. The image appears exaggerated even when it is not. The spring's beauty begins in violence. Deep underground, Wadis is heated by the restless energy beneath the park, then forced upward through fractures in the earth. When it reaches the surface, it arrives almost impossibly clear, and that clarity gives the center its luminous blue. Around the edges, where the temperature softens by degrees, entire communities of microscopic life take hold. These heat-loving organisms arrange themselves according to what they can endure, forming living bands of color around the water's fierce heart. What appears from a distance to be abstract art is, in fact, an ecosystem negotiating survival. Every shade marks a threshold. Every ring is a boundary between one form of life and another. Even the shimmering steam contributes to the illusion, blurring the line between solid ground and glowing air. The landscape feels less geological than atmospheric, as if color itself has risen from beneath the soil. And perhaps that is why the spring lingers in memory. It compresses vast ideas into a single image. Heat, chemistry, adaptation, time. It reminds us that life does not merely endure extreme conditions, sometimes it turns them into beauty. To stand before Grand Prismatic is to feel a familiar assumption quietly dissolve. We often imagine nature as balanced, temperate, gentle in its most beautiful forms. But here, beauty emerges from heat that would scald, from conditions that seem hostile to everything we understand as fragile. The question it leaves behind is simple and difficult at once. How much of life's brilliance comes not from comfort, but from the edge where survival becomes invention? What kind of world grows where even the ground seems to resist the human body? In western Madagascar, the land rises into blades, not hills, not cliffs in the usual sense, but a labyrinth of limestone sharpened by water and time into thousands of vertical points. From a distance, the formation resembles a petrified storm, a sea frozen in mid-eruption. Up close, it becomes something more intimate and more unsettling. Every edge threatens, every step must be negotiated. This is Tsingy de Bemaraha, a place whose very name carries a warning. Here, bare feet do not belong. The stone began as sediment in an ancient sea, laid down patiently over ages beyond easy imagination. Then the earth lifted it, rain found its fractures, and time performed its patient violence. Softer rock dissolved, harder rock remained. What emerged was not a landscape shaped for comfort or passage, but a forest of mineral spires, narrow canyons, hidden chambers, and razor ridges sharp enough to cut rope, cloth, and skin with almost no effort. And yet life entered anyway. In the shadowed spaces between the needles, moisture lingers, soil gathers, pockets of green take hold. Creatures move through passages that seem impossible to anything not born to them. Lemurs cross the stone with astonishing ease, as if they are reading a map invisible to us. What appears to human eyes as hostile and broken is, for other species, a home refined by adaptation. That contrast gives the place its emotional force. We are used to thinking of beauty as welcoming, as something that opens toward us. Tsingy offers a different idea. It is beautiful without invitation. It does not soften itself for our presence. It asks us to recognize that the earth contains forms of elegance that are severe, ancient, and entirely indifferent to our comfort. Standing before those jagged towers, the mind reaches for familiar words: cathedral, fortress, ruin, but none of them fit for long. The landscape belongs to no architecture we made. It is older than our metaphors. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson hidden among the stone. Not every wonder was shaped with us in mind. Some of the most extraordinary places on earth do not welcome us by feeling familiar. They humble us by reminding us that life, beauty, and meaning can flourish in forms we were never meant to master. Can a lake look so improbable that the mind mistakes it for fiction before it accepts it as water? Just beyond Dakar, where the Senegalese light turns everything it touches more vivid, there is a body of water that seems to have stepped out of imagination. Lake Retba does not shimmer blue or green. It glows pink. Not delicately, not only at sunset, but with a dense, almost confectionery brightness that makes the shoreline feel like a scene assembled by a dream rather than weather and geology. Seen for the first time, it can feel less like a landscape than a color-made liquid. Its strangeness begins at the level of the microscopic. The lake is intensely saline, so saturated with salt that it rivals some of the harshest waters on Earth. In that briny environment, a species of algae thrives by producing a reddish pigment that shields it from the punishing sun. When conditions align, especially in the drier months, that pigment spreads through the water in astonishing concentration, and the lake turns rose, magenta, sometimes almost crimson under the changing angle of the day. But the power of Lake Retba is not only visual, it is human. For thousands who work there, this surreal color is not an abstraction, but a livelihood. Salt harvesters wade into the water for hours at a time, breaking deposits from the lake bed by hand. Before entering, they coat their skin in shea butter, creating a fragile barrier against the corrosive burn. Against that pink water, their labor takes on an almost mythic appearance, as though they are mining a substance from another planet. Yet the work is real, physical, repetitive, and necessary. That tension matters. We often separate beauty from labor, spectacle from survival. But here they occupy the same frame. A place the world photographs for its impossible color is also a workplace shaped by endurance, routine, and economic need. Maybe that is why Lake Retba stays with those who see it. It reminds us that the extraordinary is not always distant from ordinary life. Sometimes wonder and work stand in the same water, under the same sun, asking us to hold both truths at once. And perhaps maturity begins there, in learning to see beauty without forgetting the people already living inside it. What happens when human error opens a door that nature decides to keep? In the Nevada desert, where the horizon is usually a lesson in restraint, there rises a form that seems to reject every color the surrounding land has agreed upon. Fly geyser is not subtle. It erupts from flat ground in bright mineral terraces of green, red, yellow, and rust, with plumes of steaming water spilling into the air as if the desert itself has sprung a leak from another world. At first glance, it appears designed, an art installation perhaps, or the set piece of a science fiction film abandoned in the dust. But its origin is stranger because it is accidental. The story begins with drilling. Early attempts to tap water and geothermal energy pierced a hidden system of superheated water beneath the earth. The projects failed by human standards. The wells were not useful in the way they were intended. But once the boreholes were left behind, hot mineral-rich water continued to rise. Over years, then decades, dissolved calcium carbonate accumulated in layers, slowly building a mound around the openings. Thermophilic algae settled across the warm surfaces, spreading impossible color over the stone. Failure, given time, became architecture. There is something deeply moving in that sequence. We tend to think of mistakes as endings, as deviations from the proper path. Yet Fly Geyser suggests a more complicated truth. Sometimes a failed intention does not disappear. It enters the world and is transformed by forces beyond us. Nature does not repair the error by returning everything to what it was. Instead, it improvises. It incorporates the wound. It grows something new. That does not make the mistake noble. It makes the world responsive in ways we rarely predict. Human ambition drills downward for utility, and the earth answers with beauty no one planned. Seen in that light, Fly Geyser becomes more than a geological oddity. It becomes a meditation on unintended consequences. Some destructive, some strangely generative, many both at once. It asks whether every mark we leave must be judged only by purpose, or whether time can alter even our failures into forms of unexpected meaning. In the end, the geyser keeps rising, indifferent to the original plan. Steam lifts into desert air, colors deepen in the sun, and the land, once interrupted, continues speaking in a language far more imaginative than the one that first tried to control it. What would a mountain look like if it had been imagined before geology learned the word for it? At the meeting point of Venezuela, Brazil, and Guyana, a colossal plateau rises from the rainforest with an authority that feels almost mythic. Monte Roraima does not taper gently into a peak. It does not perform the familiar shape we expect from mountains. Instead, it lifts a vast, flat summit above sheer cliffs, as if a piece of another continent had been placed on top of the clouds. From a distance, it resembles an altar, a fortress, a table for giants. The eye keeps searching for a natural explanation, and the heart keeps answering with legend. For the indigenous peoples of the region, this place has long been more than stone. It belongs to a story world where land, memory, and spirit are inseparable. One tradition speaks of a mighty tree that once held the fruits of the world, and of the stump left behind after its fall. Looking at Monte Roraima, the myth does not feel like ornament. It feels like another form of perception, a way of honoring a landscape too singular to be reduced to measurement alone. And yet science too has its own reverence here. The mountain is part of an ancient geological formation, a survivor from deep time, its sandstone among the oldest exposed rock on Earth. Isolated for ages by nearly vertical cliffs, the summit became a kind of sky island. Rain falls there almost daily. Water pools in hollows, flows through black stone channels, and nourishes life found nowhere else. Plants and creatures adapted to this elevated world as if evolution had been given a private room in which to experiment. That isolation is what makes Monte Roraima feel so emotionally charged. It is not only strange to look at, it carries the ache of separation. A world above the world, a place close enough to see yet for centuries nearly impossible to reach. No wonder it has inspired stories of lost realms and hidden life. The human imagination has always rushed to fill the silence left by inaccessible places. But perhaps the mountain's deepest power lies in how it joins fact and wonder without diminishing either. It proves that a landscape can be fully real and still feel symbolic, ancient, and immediate at once. Standing on its summit, with clouds moving below like a second ocean, a question begins to form. How many of the world's most powerful places do not merely challenge our understanding of nature, but expand our sense of what reality is allowed to feel like? What if the night sky could exist underground, and what if its stars were alive? In the limestone caves of New Zealand's Waitomo region, darkness is not empty. It gathers overhead like velvet, deep and complete, until suddenly the ceiling begins to glow. Thousands of tiny blue-green lights appear above the black water, scattered with such quiet precision that the mind reaches instinctively for the familiar comparison: stars. But these lights do not belong to any galaxy. They are living larvae suspended from rock, turning hunger into radiance. The caves themselves were shaped slowly, carved by water through stone over immense spans of time. That alone would make them beautiful. But beauty here does not stop at geology. A species found only in New Zealand transformed these chambers into something almost cosmological. The glowworms shine to attract prey, lowering fine sticky threads into the darkness below. Insects drift toward the light and become entangled. What seems from a distance like serenity is also a form of hunting. Wonder and survival occupy the same luminous breath. Visitors often move through this world in silence, carried by boat under ceilings that shimmer like constellations. No wind, no daylight, only the soft echo of water and the sensation that the earth has borrowed the language of the heavens for its own hidden use. It is a rare experience, not simply seeing something beautiful, but feeling one scale of existence fold into another. The cave becomes sky, the larva becomes star, the familiar order of things loosens. And perhaps that is what makes Waitomo so unforgettable. It reveals how easily human perception can be rearranged. We look up and think of distance, infinity, the cold brilliance of space. Yet here, beneath the ground, that same emotional response is summoned by fragile lives no larger than a fingertip, glowing because they must eat to survive. There is tenderness in that contradiction. Much of what moves us most deeply in nature is not grand because it is separate from life's basic struggles, but because it emerges directly from them. Light is not always transcendence. Sometimes it is appetite. Sometimes beauty is simply survival, seen from the right angle. So the caves leave us with a gentler question than we expected. If even hunger can become luminous, what other hidden processes of life have we mistaken for ordinary, only because we have not yet seen them in the dark? How can something be enormous enough to guide astronauts, yet almost invisible to the people walking across it? In the Western Sahara, near the old settlement of Ouaddanou, the desert carries a secret too large for ordinary perspective. On the ground, the Risha structure offers ridges, stone, heat, and distance, nothing that immediately announces its astonishing geometry. But from above, the land resolves into concentric rings spanning miles, a vast circular formation inscribed into the earth like an eye opening in slow motion. Seen from space, it looks deliberate, symbolic, almost designed for a viewer who would not exist for most of human history. That tension between scale and perception is part of its power. We often imagine the greatest wonders as things that overwhelm us the moment we stand before them. The Risha structure does something stranger. It hides inside plain sight. Its meaning depends on altitude, on distance, on the arrival of a technological gaze. Only when human beings left the ground did this piece of the desert reveal its full image, becoming a landmark for astronauts orbiting far above the atmosphere. Geologists describe it not as an impact crater, though it resembles one, but as the exposed remains of a lifted dome, sculpted by erosion over immense time. Layer by layer, harder and softer rock wore away differently until the desert became a pattern. Even with that explanation, the emotional effect remains intact. The rings seem too symmetrical, too composed, as though the earth briefly turned abstract and drew a memory it had not meant to share. Naturally, stories gathered around it. Some have linked its circular form to old myths of lost civilizations, as people so often do when a place feels larger than explanation. But the more profound truth may be simpler. We are creatures who search for meaning and pattern, especially when pattern appears where none was expected. The eye sees order and asks who made it. The heart asks why. Perhaps that is what the Risha structure finally reveals. Not a buried city, not a solved secret, but the limits of human scale. So much of reality depends on where we stand. Up close, there is only desert. From far above, there is an eye in the sand. And that leaves us with an unsettling thought. How many truths remain unnoticed not because they are hidden, but because we have not yet found the right distance from which to see them? What does age look like when it freezes into clarity? In southern Siberia, where winter arrives not as a season, but as a long act of transformation, Lake Baikal becomes something almost impossible to name. For much of the year, it is already extraordinary, a vast body of ancient freshwater, held between mountains older than many landscapes that surround it. But when cold finally claims the surface, the lake reveals a second identity. Ice forms not as a dull white lid, but as glass. Clear, hard, and luminous, it stretches across the water with such transparency that the earth seems to vanish beneath your feet. Walking there can feel like stepping onto preserved air. Below the surface, the lake holds shadows, fractures, and suspended pockets of frozen methane that rise in pale columns like strings of trapped moons. Wind sculpts the ice into ridges and turquoise shards. Light passes through it with a clean severity, turning the entire landscape into a study in crystal and silence. The familiar idea of a lake disappears. In its place is something that feels closer to another planet, or perhaps to a future archaeology of winter. Yet Baikal is not alien because it lacks life. It is alien because it holds too much of it, too deeply and for too long. This lake is ancient in a way that resists casual thought. It has endured for millions of years, collecting species found nowhere else, preserving ecosystems in depths still not fully understood. Even its famous seal population carries the echo of a long biological mystery, a reminder that time can isolate life until it becomes singular. That may be why the frozen surface feels so moving. Transparency usually suggests simplicity, the easy revelation of what lies beneath. But at Baikal, clarity makes the mystery sharper. The more clearly you see, the more enormous the hidden world becomes. Depth does not diminish under glass. It intensifies. And perhaps that is the lesson winter offers here. We spend much of life longing for clear answers, believing that to see through something is to understand it. But some realities grow more profound when they become visible. Some truths do not flatten under inspection. They deepen. So the lake remains beneath the ice, ancient and patient, asking a quiet question through its impossible surface. When the world becomes transparent, are we really seeing more clearly, or only realizing how much has always been there beyond our reach? What does it mean when stone begins to behave like a dream? In China's Hunan province, where mist drifts through the valleys like a second atmosphere, the Tianzi Mountains rise in columns rather than slopes. Thousands of narrow sandstone pillars lift themselves from the earth, tall and vertical, their tops crowned with trees and shrubs that seem to float above the world below. On mornings when fog settles beneath them, the peaks appear suspended in empty space, untethered from gravity, as though the land has forgotten how to remain connected to itself. It is a landscape that seems to invite disbelief. The eye expects mountains to gather mass, to build toward a summit with familiar logic. But here the rock has been shaped by time into something finer and stranger. Water, wind, and immense geological patience wore away softer layers, leaving behind these towering remnants like the last notes of an ancient chord. What remains is not a single mountain range in the ordinary sense, but a forest of stone, each pillar standing apart while still belonging to the whole. That tension between isolation and connection gives the place its emotional force. Each column appears solitary, almost fragile against the sky, yet together they create an architecture vast enough to alter the imagination. It is no surprise that artists and filmmakers have looked at these peaks and seen another world. The mountains do not merely resemble fantasy, they help explain where fantasy comes from. Sometimes invention is only memory rearranged after encountering reality too strange to hold directly. But long before cameras arrived, these formations already carried human meaning. They were folded into local history, legend, and identity, their heights serving not just as scenery, but as witnesses to generations of storytelling. That matters. Places like this are never only visual. They gather memory. They become part of how a people understand endurance, loss, resistance, and belonging. Standing above the clouds on a glass walkway or looking up from the valley floor, you feel the strange intimacy of scale. The pillars are immense, yet their elegance makes them seem almost delicate, as if one strong breath from the sky might scatter them. They do not, of course. They have endured for ages. But their appearance reminds us how often strength wears the shape of grace. And perhaps that is what the Tsingy Mountains finally reveal. Not that the world resembles a dream, but that dreams may have always borrowed their most impossible images from the patient, vertical poetry of the earth itself. What are we really searching for when we follow the world to its strangest edges? Perhaps not proof that the planet is bizarre, though it is. Not evidence that mystery survives, though clearly it does. What these places finally offer is something more personal and more enduring. They return us to a state many of us left behind too early, the ability to look at reality without immediately shrinking it into explanation. Across this journey, the earth has appeared in forms that unsettled ordinary language. An ocean seemed to fall through itself. A shoreline turned red as memory. Trees curved like unanswered questions. Springs glowed with living color. Stone rose in blades, in pillars, in impossible suspended worlds. A lake became pink, then another became transparent as glass. A cave borrowed the grammar of stars. A desert revealed an eye visible only from the sky. Again and again, the planet refused to remain predictable. And yet what makes these places matter is not only their visual strangeness, it is the human feeling they awaken. Awe, yes, but also perspective. Each landscape reminds us that we live on a world shaped by forces older, slower, and more imaginative than our daily routines allow us to remember. Time, pressure, erosion, heat, accident, adaptation. These are not abstract processes. They are authors. They write in water, mineral, light, and silence. We walk through the sentences they leave behind. There is also a gentler truth running beneath all of this. We are not separate from wonder because we have learned to explain pieces of it. Knowledge does not cancel mystery. In its best form, it deepens it. To understand how a place formed is not to drain it of meaning, but to stand closer to the patience and intricacy that made it possible. Explanation, when held with humility, becomes another kind of reverence. So perhaps the final lesson is simple. The world does not need to become more extraordinary. It already is. What must change is our attention. Because somewhere, even now, water is shaping stone, color is blooming under the right light, and the earth is quietly composing scenes that will one day make someone stop, stare, and feel for a moment that reality has widened. And maybe that is enough. Maybe the future of wonder depends not on finding another world, but on remembering how to see this one.